Hi, everybody. Welcome to the textiles class. This is going to be a short introduction into the textiles class, and I'll talk a little bit about what we are going to cover in this course. So first things first, we're going to talk a little bit about textiles. So textile is any flexible material that has a planar structure generally, and we use that term as a general term for fibers, yarns, fabrics, and anything related to those type of materials. There are also polymers. I'm not going to go through this yet. So you may think that textiles are only used in our clothes as fabrics, but there are so many different uses of textiles. We use them in interiors, we use them in upholstery, we use them in window treatments, curtains, but we also use them in so many interesting areas that you would probably not know about, like toothbrushes, for example. Those are textile materials. In helmets, we use textile materials, water filters, or medical applications, the aprons, the masks, even the sutures that we stitch up people with. Tea bags are textile materials. These are made out of leather, horseback riding seats, and things like that, hoses, water hoses, chemical protection clothing, or astronauts clothing, but also sailboats use the sails made out of textiles, parachutes, umbrellas. I mean, there are so many other uses of textiles. Now, the textile manufacturing process goes through this cycle. So we have fibers, we turn them into yarns, then we turn the yarns into fabrics, then we dye the fabrics or print the fabrics or finish the fabrics, right? So we have fibers turn into yarns, then fabrics, and so on. Fibers can be in many different forms. Cotton, for example, blooms like a flower. It's a plant, or wool is coming from the sheep. We also have some synthetic fibers that we make in a lab environment. Then we twist those fibers and create a little more durable yarns that we can use to knit or weave fabrics. And fabrics, again, are made out of yarns, and yarns are made out of fibers. And when fabrics are first made, they're usually gray goods, which means they don't have color, and they are raw materials. So we color them by either dyeing, or we sometimes print them, but then also we add certain properties to the fabrics, like stain resistant finish or water repellent finish or fire retardant finish, to make them more suitable for its end use, because it matters what you're making the fabric for, right? I also want to mention a little bit about smart textiles. There are all kinds of innovations right now with textiles. People put chips on them. They're used in wearable applications. This pillow, for example, has a timer, so it just gives you light to wake you up in the morning. We use them in seat belts, in cars, and there are so many different ways that we can use them. Now, I have all these slides that will be available to you on Blackboard, but other than these slides, I'm also going to be using iTextiles. It's an ebook, and I will give you the information on how to use it. And I will also have little quizzes here for you, but there are also lecture slides here. So let's just go through these lecture slides. I kind of summarized this a little bit for you. But if you go through these lecture slides, there are nice pictures that you can see. These are, for example, fibers. And then when you twist them and pull them a little bit with attention, you turn them into yarns. They wind on a bobbin, and then we use those yarns to make fabrics by weaving, knitting, braiding. There are many methods we'll talk about. Then we color them by dyeing or printing, and we finish them. And these are good pictures that you can find in your iTextiles. For example, this fabric has a stain repellent finish, and they drop some milk on it, and the milk doesn't get absorbed. So if you just wash this off, it will not stain the fabric because the milk doesn't get absorbed into the fabric. But on this fabric, there's no stain repellent finish. So you can see the milk gets absorbed. It made the fabric wet, and it will stain probably. So this is what finishing fabrics is about. These are, different major end use categories of fabrics and textiles. I talked a little bit about these. There are also packaging materials. We use textiles for agricultural products, outdoor furniture, automotive textiles. So these are some examples of apparel, sleepwear, curtains, carpets, sacks. We use some of those when you buy like onions or potatoes in the store, or they put other materials in them. These bandages, for example, are textile materials that are engineered for this end use, so that they can stick together without clips. So for whatever end use you are designing your fabric, you have to think about its properties that way. So the properties become very important, and we'll talk about that in our next lecture. This is an example of protective clothing. This is for chemical protection so that the chemicals don't spill into the skin of the person. This is outdoor furniture. Again, these type of furniture, you have to make sure that they don't get damaged by the rain or humidity or fade in sunlight, for example. These are some textile materials used in horticultural applications. These are twine that are used in pepper plants and so on. Now, we are going to talk a little bit more about properties in our next class, and we will talk about the definition of each property, but I want to give you a short overview today to get you prepared for it. Now, when you design a textile material for something, you have to think about the performance characteristics. And we divide those into 3 categories: aesthetics, comfort, durability. So when it comes to aesthetics, it's about physical appearance of the fabric, drape, wrinkle, resistance. So I'm going to talk about these items really quickly. And then there are comfort properties, air permeability, stretch, and then there are durability issues about strength, abrasion resistance. So what does it all mean? Those are some of the terms that I want everybody to know, so I'll just go over them quickly. For example, some fabrics are very dull. They don't have any shine to them. And some fabrics have luster. So luster is when you have that sheen that results from the reflection of the light. Okay, some fabrics have luster, some fabrics are dull. Opacity is the ability of the fabric to hide the object behind it. So for example, they have a piece of paper that says textiles behind these fabrics. There are 3 fabrics here. This fabric has high opacity, so it hides the writing. You can't read anything here. This has medium opacity. You can read a little bit. And this has low opacity, which means it is a see-through fabric. It's sheer. You can totally read what is behind it. Okay, so that's opacity. And you can see different levels of opacity on fabrics. Drape is a way a fabric falls or hangs. And stiff fabrics like this will have no drape, and fabrics that have a little more drape will flow like this, right? So these are different levels of drape. This is almost 0 drape. It's very stiff. This is a little better. This has a little more drape, a lot more than this, and then this has the most drape. Wrinkle and crush resistance. Wrinkle resistance is when you are wrinkling a fabric and then you release it, does it give you those wrinkles, or does it just disappear? For example, this fabric, you wrinkle it up and you open it up and it already is wrinkled. Linen fabrics are like that, right? But this fabric has good wrinkle recovery, which means you wrinkle it up and then you release it and you don't see any permanent wrinkles on this. These are different levels of wrinkle recovery. As you can see here, this is probably the worst, and this looks like the best. And there is a tester for this as well. We can test all of those performance properties. There are standardized testing methods for wrinkle recovery, crash resistance, and so on. Crash resistance is something important in a carpet, for example, because everybody's going to step on it. And you don't want the piles on the carpet to just get flattened when people are walking on it. So you can see this carpet doesn't have very good crush resistance because all these piles are getting flattened a little bit. So that's what that means. Now, dimensional stability is about how a fabric shrinks or whether it shrinks. So sometimes some fabrics shrink when you wash them. Some fabrics shrink with heat. So we also call this shape retention, like retaining its shape during use. So we can measure that too. You measure a piece of fabric, the length, the width, you launder it or wash it in the washing machine, and then you measure the length and width again to see if it has shrunk. So that will show you its shape retention or dimensional stability. This is a wool sweater that shrunk from this original size into this after washing in the washing machine. So some fabrics will shrink a lot. Snagging is the pulling of yarns on the fabric. And these are some examples of snagging. So you can see when the yarns pull, it starts to give you these kind of looks. Like this is a towel, the yarn snagged here. Sometimes one yarn will just get pulled out of the fabric and you will get a stain like this. I mean, not a stain, but a mark. Peeling is when you have those short fibers that roll up on the surface of the fabric and makes little balls like that and just stay on the surface. So these are different examples of peeling of fabrics. Sometimes that happens when you're rubbing, for example, on your pants. When you're rubbing your handbag against your pants over time, it will start pulling up some of the yarns and it will roll up like this and cause peeling. Color fastness is the ability of the fabric to retain its color after use or after washing. So there are a lot of different things we look at about color fastness. So we look at color fastness to sunlight. For example, this fabric doesn't have very good color fastness to sunlight because this was the original color and it faded to this color after exposure to sunlight. This is color fastness to cracking or rubbing the fabric. And sometimes, you know, a fabric in this color will stain another fabric when you rub it against it. This is a bleeding example when a color starts bleeding into another color on the same garment. This is abrasion effect. So when you just have a lot of friction or it's rubbing against another surface, you start losing color. This is a color change because of pollution and combustion fumes. And this is a color change from perspiration. So sometimes your perspiration will also fade the colors on your garment. These are machines that we can use to test color fastness to light. And sometimes different types of colors will have different color fastness. So maybe the navy will fade more than the red color. This is another machine that we use for testing color fastness to cracking. And this is for perspiration testing. And then we have comfort. Comfort properties are moisture management, for example. You know, how absorbent is your fabric to moisture? Absorbency is very important for comfort because when you are wearing a t-shirt, for example, and you're sweating, you don't want that sweat to just stay there and stick to your body and make you wet and clammy. You want your t-shirt to take that moisture away from your body and make you feel dry. And so fabrics that are absorbent or they have good moisture absorption will feel more comfortable. Like cotton will be more comfortable in the summer because it absorbs all the moisture from your body. There's the wicking. We'll talk a little bit more about those properties in our next class, but I just want to give you an overview of these. Air permeability can be important because it's how the fabric flows through, how the air flows through the fabric. And if it does, it's more breathable, it makes you feel more comfortable. But sometimes you don't want air permeability because, if you're wearing a wind parka and you want it to protect you from the wind, you don't want that wind to pass right through your fabric, right? So in some cases, you want it to be air impermeable. So those are comfort related. Thermal insulation is important when you're making a sweater. You want it to insulate your body and make you feel warm. Stretch and recovery might be important when you're, for example, when you're wearing jeans, they're too tight and they don't have any stretch. It's very uncomfortable. So sometimes you want a fabric to stretch, but you also want it to recover from that stretch. So when you stretch it, it doesn't stay in that length. It doesn't elongate, right? Static buildup is important. Some fabrics will give you a lot of static buildup and it will just make you feel very uncomfortable. Some fabrics are skin irritants, like wool. Some people are allergic to wool, for example. So those are comfort related. Now, when it comes to durability properties, we talk about strength. And we usually talk about tensile strength when we talk about textiles, because tensile strength is measured on a machine like this, where you have a strip of fabric and you put, there are clamps on each side, you clamp it up, and then there's a load that you put on here. So the clamps will start pulling against each other until the fabric breaks. So you measure that load that you're putting in there to pull the fabric, and it's recorded on the computer. And then you measure the load where it breaks the fabric. So that is the tensile strength of the fabric. So if a fabric takes a lot more power to break, that means it has better tensile strength. But if it breaks with just a little bit of force, then it means it has low tensile strength. So tensile strength is all about durability of the fabric, the strength of the fabric. We also test the bursting of a fabric with pressure. So you take a fabric, you put some air pressure, and you measure how much pressure it can withstand before it bursts. These are tearing testers and so on. Abrasion is another important property, abrasion resistance. This is the ability of the fabric to withstand wear due to the rubbing or friction, right? And we can test that as well. We have testers that we use for that. With abrasion, with friction and rubbing, sometimes you start to see your yarns breaking or they're wearing out, and then it starts tearing off over time. So abrasion resistance can be important in materials. For example, on a chair, if you keep sitting on it, you're rubbing on it. And if it doesn't have good abrasion resistance, the more you sit on it, the more it's going to start breaking, right? Or wearing out. This is a shirt. The neckline is rubbing against your neck all the time and it starts wearing off. And this is a magnified view of this here. So you can see it's just rubbing off. Weathering is the ability of the fabric to withstand environmental conditions like sunlight, heat, moisture. And when they get worn out by these conditions, we call it aging of the fabric. All right, so in terms of fabric care, we have three categories we are going to talk about. Cleaning, this is about washing your fabric in the washing machine or sometimes dry cleaning and so on. And then there's ironing. So you need to know what kind of ironing temperature you can use. Is it going to burn your fabric and so on. And then the storage. And storage is important because sometimes insects will eat up your fabrics. Can you store it in the basement where there's mold and humidity? Sometimes mildew will impact your fabrics. So we'll talk a little bit about how to care for different types of fabrics as well. And this is where I'm going to end this lecture. So you can access both lecture slides and you can see the lectures on your Textiles. I will also provide you with those videos. Okay, I'll see you in the next class.